Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Lori, and welcome to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. This podcast fosters curiosity and understanding about neurodiversity while empowering individuals with tools for acceptance and inclusion in classrooms, the workplace, and communities. Featuring shared stories of neurodiverse life experiences, it sheds light on navigating a world not designed for diversity. Universally Unique starts now. Hi, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to Universally Unique. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Perle. And before we hear his story of neurodiversity, we are going to take 3 box breaths. I will count for us. We'll breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and then do the next breath. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and a sigh to let it out. All right. So, Dr. Perle, thank you for joining me today. Is it okay if I call you Stephen?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, if you would sort of tell us your journey that you've been on with learning more about your own neurodiversity. I know this has been a long learning process. It's been going on for a while.
So actually, I have this vivid recollection at age 6, I guess, in first grade. Um, I know where I was seated. I can see the whole room with my dad reading a book. And I don't remember what the book said, but I'll make it up. It's my typical made up part of the story is that it said I'm reading The Big Red Dog. And my father looks at me with like, sort of astonishment and says, "What?" And I said, "The big red dog." And he asked me again, and I said, "The big red dog." And then he points to where the word red would be, and there's no red. And he says, "Where do you see red?" And I start crying because it was there, Daddy. Yeah.
Mm.
I know that they wanted to hold me back a year, but my dad was trained as an educator, and one of his classmates was the school principal, so he got him to push me along. And um, my dad changed jobs a lot, so this was in a suburb of Buffalo, then moved to Toronto, moved back to another Buffalo suburb. And then the second half of fifth grade, we moved to Wellesley, Mass. And for people who do not know, Wellesley is a rather well-to-do suburb of Boston. My dad had declared bankruptcy, so I'm not a child of wealth. And that's how we ended, I don't know, it's how we ended up in Wellesley from bankruptcy.
Mm.
And
Nice recovery, huh?
yeah, exactly. Well, and Wellesley was for me just a watershed from everything, like every part of life in so many different ways. And prior to Wellesley, I'd say that the only thing I excelled at in school was science. Everything else I did okay, but and my fifth grade teacher was somebody who wouldn't let you phone it in. She was what we used to describe as a battle axe. One of my classmates had her mom had her for fifth grade also.
Oh.
Yeah. And so she really pushed me on math. by sixth grade, I did self-paced math. I did the entire math book by myself before I had to join the rest of the class for something, a different book. But in seventh grade, I went through a whole battery of tests with an educational psychologist, which was based on the recommendations from my fifth and sixth grade teacher. So in middle school, and they put me in eighth grade. Instead of taking social studies, I had a special ed class. And if this was today, it would never happen because I read and did math above my grade level. But what my fifth and sixth grade teachers identified was that my verbal skills were dramatically outstripping my anything that I did writing. And so I had a special ed class. It was an experimental program from HEW. So, I often say to people, I probably have the longest diagnosis of learning disabilities of anyone they'll meet because that was done in 1970.
Wow. And it was a very specific one in the area of writing because your reading and your math were above grade level.
Well, it was all sort of learning disabilities. At that point in time, the
Well, they
only
just
label,
jumbled it all together. But in this
yeah,
current day and age, they would identify it as a learning disability in the area of writing or what they would describe as dysgraphia.
yeah. Well, no, reading, and there was hearing, and also fine motor control.
Oh, okay.
I,
Yeah.
I remember the sort of class activity that in hindsight I say was the one to deal with fine motor control was using very flat, brightly colored mosaics.
Mm-hmm.
What my kids in school, when they were in elementary school, the teachers called math manipulatives.
Oh, okay.
And we
Yep.
would make these huge mosaics on,
Mm-hmm.
a 6 foot diameter table. So if you push a little bit hard, because they're mostly triangles or you know, what's the shape when it's two triangles on top, one on top of the other. And and you would move, if you screwed it up, well, you had all these other people who worked on it also, so you had to fit it all back
Yep.
together again. And there were also activities they did that were specific to hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Although there's a lot of what I think they identified at hearing was just the difference of having a Buffalo accent, a Toronto accent, a Wellesley, Massachusetts accent.
Yeah.
But my wife would say I still have hearing difficulties, but that's, I think,
Yeah,
a
but
spousal
that's
thing.
what all wives say.
Right, right,
I,
exactly.
I don't think it's not so much that he's not hearing, it's that he's not listening.
Right. And and I'd say from my own standpoint, I realize that I don't have very linear thinking.
Hmm.
So throughout high school, when I had to write papers, my mother would type them for me and I'd write them out longhand. And it'd be the kind of thing that, I'd get 2 or 3 pages into it, and then I would write a whole new paragraph that I put a big caret on the side, write a letter A, and then go back and write a little A, and she would insert that in there. And I know the thing that fixed that and made me from someone who didn't write, I mean, I even took a class in college in creative writing. What took me from a non-writer to a writer was a computer because the nonlinear thinking was irrelevant. I stream of consciousness, put it all there, and then jumble it back
Yeah.
around afterwards. It's also a computer screen seemed to work better with the way I can read.
Yeah, I think for many students, folks have figured out that giving them a keyboard and a computer changed everything. And
Yeah.
then for some other students, that actually is not the right way to go. And looking at everybody from an individual perspective is really, really critical.
Yeah,
Some kids do
and
better if you actually dictate, into some kind of, program that'll accept the audio part and then go back and figure out, well, I just talked at it and now let me figure out how to rearrange it.
the audio is an interesting thing because when I was in chiropractic college, and an enormous volume of material to read, and I would tape record my classes. And so I was in school in Texas from 79 to 83, and I bought this very early a cassette tape player that would play back things at a faster speed. I can listen faster,
Oh,
but it didn't make the pitch go high. It chopped out little pieces and squished it together.
oh, so it didn't sound like Minnie Mouse.
Right, exactly. Which, if you do this with YouTube or any different reels, you can go in and change the playback speed,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make it sound like Minnie and Mickey.
Yeah.
Um, um,
I was,
oh, it's Snoopy.
it's Snoopy now. Uh,
I thought I had
yeah,
a mouse on it.
I
Yeah.
needed that tape recorder when I was taking a gross anatomy because I very faithfully and religiously taped every single lecture, but never listened to them again because they took 2 hours and I
Yep.
did like I couldn't figure out where the time was. I didn't do well in that class, but that's it. That's somewhat. I'm now a special educator and not what I had originally started out to be that needed to pass gross anatomy. But so I think though your nonlinear thinking though has taken you in a variety of different directions and has opened you up to a variety of different, I don't know if I want to call them subsets or different aspects of your chiropractic career. Would that be correct?
Well, I practiced in New York from 83 till 91. And um, in the last couple of years, I sort of, I started reading actually a lot more scientific literature, and things that I was seeing with patients, I started asking the question, let's, investigate this from a research standpoint. And I started jumbling in my head about doing that. And then the opportunity came along when the University of Bridgeport started the chiropractic program in 1991, and I sold my practice and was the first faculty member hired then. And
Wow.
then during the time period that I was at UB, the nonlinearity comes into the fact that my original research was all biomechanics related. And then, I don't know, I'd have a conversation with someone and we'd think up an idea and then we'd go that way. And then I'd have a conversation with somebody else and we'd go this way. And so I have a pretty diverse set of published papers. And the weirdest one is that my right now most cited paper is about AI.
Oh, okay. A fairly recent
2 years
one.
ago, and it's my previously most cited paper was one I did with some colleagues on factors affecting masters athletes, and that one, was way up there, and in less than, and that was 30 years ago, and this AI one in 2 years has blown past that for a number of citations. I mean, every day I get some notification, almost every day I get a notification that was cited by another journal.
So give me a little bit of give me the abstract on this AI paper. Is it focusing on how you would use AI in your practice, or what is the focus
It
of it?
it it was really about, can AI write scholarly papers?
Oh, okay.
And we discussed that issue and discussed the issue, which is pretty old tech at this point in time, about how to determine whether something was written by AI. But I guess it's foundational to a lot of people that we were the first ones asking this question. And then what we also did was we had an AI, I think it was ChatGPT, write the paper and
Oh,
then see, could we identify, because we had already written it, but then see if it wrote the paper, and could we identify, or did it come up with something similar to what we did? So,
oh, that's interesting. And I think currently within education, I know my husband came back yesterday and said something about kids are handing in work that was completely done by AI. They don't even have enough, I don't know, desire, knowledge, understanding, or whatever that you should at least try to make it sound like it's yours. Um, but I think that's becoming a really big issue. It's an awful lot like the internet, in my opinion, is it's incredibly useful in so many ways and also incredibly detrimental
yeah, yeah, I
in
agree.
others.
Well,
Um,
that's so I think it's 15 years ago or so. I was teaching a ergonomics class at UB, and fully half of my class took their research project, which was to redesign something in an ergonomic way. They had to do
mhm.
4 different things. They took them from the web, and the dumbest part, I mean, if you're going to cheat, be a little bit smart about this. Most of them took it from a website I shared with them to give them examples of how to do it.
You would
Oh,
think that graduate students would be a little more savvy than that.
yeah. But I actually just recently read an interesting implementation in uh, AI in education, which was to tell the students to have an AI write the assignment and then verify what the AI said.
No, I like that idea because then it helps them see it was useful in one way, but it also created some other problems over here. Or when the teacher gets basically the same paper, like from five different students, then you start to go, oh, you either all worked on this together or you all
Right.
talked to the same AI person and they wrote it for you.
Well,
Um,
I think part of it is getting them to figure out that the AI is hallucinating or that it's not using, we'll say, well verified sources to begin with. It might not be hallucinating, but it's chosen sources that it shouldn't trust. And in fact, that idea of looking at sources that shouldn't trust is what actually prompted the whole idea about the paper we wrote, because I asked an AI a question that I knew the answer to, posted it to a Facebook group for chiropractors, and the answer it came up with was inconsistent with what the best scientific evidence is at this point in time. And one of the editors of British Medical Journal Sports Medicine was in the group and said, "Hey, we should write a paper about AI." That's how that happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the more advanced version of Wikipedia when students were using that as their like your primary source. No, that might be a place to gather some information and move on,
Right.
find some buzzwords and move on. So tell me a little bit more about your educational experiences or maybe just life in general. Is there anyone who you would say was kind of your champion, your cheerleader while you were working through some of the process that you went through to figure out how you operate best in the world?
Me.
It
I
was you.
mean, literally after that middle school class, and I should say in that class, you know, we'll say I'm pretty high functioning. There are people in that class in eighth grade and in ninth grade who are incapable of actually reading.
Hmm.
And you had to have a certain minimum IQ score to get into this, so that that was their check to make sure this was not an intelligence issue. After that, I don't think any of that information transferred to, because I didn't go to high school in Wellesley. We moved to Northern Jersey. I don't know whether that went with my records or whether they cared at all. Um, I mean, I remember my freshman year in math, um, the the teacher gave me a B in the first quarter, even though I scored 100 on every test.
Because you didn't do the homework.
I didn't do any of the homework ever. And I mean, it was just too easy. And she, for whatever reason, left after the first quarter. And the guy who replaced her was like, "You get 100. I don't care whether you do the homework or not, pal."
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah,
that
that's a
that that that
common
was me having to deal with it myself
Yeah, that's a common teacher thing where they just really insist that homework is so valuable. And it is, depending upon what
for a
you
lot of
ask kids
people.
to do, but sometimes you ask them to do stuff that has no value. And then you get caught in that cycle of if you don't bring your homework in, I'm lowering your grade even though you understand the material. Then
Yeah.
maybe I should
And
give
then,
you harder homework.
well, that would be true too. And so, through high school, you know, it was, I'm going to say to a large degree, it was all a non-issue for me from that point on.
Mm,
It was an issue, but I just worked my way around
you
it.
figured
And
out how to deal with
so,
it.
nobody helped me doing any of it at any point in time.
So, I think maybe perhaps a couple things happened as you moved from Massachusetts to New Jersey. Sometimes school districts don't want to know that you were getting special education services because they need to pay for those. Although you were kind of on the cusp of that legal action. And other times, I think records get lost or don't get passed along as efficiently as they need to. And then maybe even by the time somebody figured out that, your paperwork showed up 6 months later, it became it was unnecessary.
Right.
Uh, you know, I I guess there's a piece of me though that's a little bit saddened by the fact that there wasn't anybody who was sort of cheering you on or championing you in any way. Was there anyone as you got further along in your education, or was college and chiropractic school somewhat similar in that regard, is that you just figured stuff out for yourself?
I just figured that stuff out for myself. I mean, I went from high school to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I'll say at RPI I did not do that well. Did actually pretty poorly. And it sort of was the easier the class, the worse the grade.
Hmm.
And then a whole bunch of different things happened in my last semester when my grades came. I was really thinking I was going to do the best I'd done that year was a 3.5, and I got a 0.9. I mean,
Wow.
I had a 98 average going into one final. I got a D in that class. I had a 92 average going into a final of another course. I got a D in that course. I was doing a self-paced research project, and I thought I did not, you know, students don't know what the hell's going on in academia. And I thought, well, I'm working really hard. I'm working with my advisor, but we didn't produce anything yet. So I got an incomplete. I thought I was going to get an A because of what I was doing.
Hmm.
And and I have to say that was one of the best semesters in college I ever had. And not that I was, on drugs all the time and having fun. That's not to say I wasn't either, but I learned more in that semester through the semester, during the semester, than I learned in any other semester ever in college, I think, until I got into grad school. And the other thing was, from a personal standpoint, it taught me that failure isn't the worst thing in life. In the end, my parents still love me. Life still went on. I had already transferred to SUNY Buffalo, so the grades were irrelevant. I'd already gotten into SUNY Buffalo, and but in Buffalo, I thought, change a major and change of things would change things. And in fact, once again, if the class was easy, I did poor in the class.
Yep.
And I didn't
And
really fix myself from a standpoint of as how do I study and how do I do that until I got into chiropractic college. And and there I finally felt like a fish in water from an educational standpoint.
well, I would suspect too, by the time you get to a graduate degree, you've narrowed the focus down to something that you know that you're very interested in.
Yeah,
And I mean, the good news, bad news about undergraduate programs is they ask you to take a variety of courses because sometimes you don't really know what you're going to do, or they're thinking that we're creating well-rounded citizens, which we may or may not be doing. So then, here you are in English literature or whatever, and you don't necessarily like it, but you really like, I don't know, a math class or a science class or a psychology class, but you have to take, you have to sort of
take the
take
distribution
things off the
requirements.
whole buffet and not order just the stuff you want off the menu,
Yep.
which I think is good and bad. I think it helps students figure out maybe where they want to be or what they want to do, especially if they have no idea. And other times I think we're wasting people's time because they already know where they're going and we should probably just get there.
Yeah. And then I'd say, when I was practicing, I did a lot of volunteer work, both in my profession and profession related, but not in the profession. I was involved in track and field in New York, and I was involved in, we'll say, professional organizations within sports medicine. And both of those were like tremendously demanding, lots of things to go on. And my wife is a list writer. Lists don't work for me because I don't get everything off the list, and then I have to rewrite the list. And I got a very early software that handled keeping checklists of things, and that worked for my brain. And then from that one I got a Palm Pilot,
Hmm.
and then worked my way to I still use one piece of software called OmniFocus to manage tasks. But my colleagues in both of those organizations were always amazed by, I'd say I'd call you in 2 weeks, and 2 weeks to the day I'd call them. I'd say I'd have something done at a particular date, and I always did. And they go, yo, you're so organized and you're so like this. And I'm like, no, I'm a ditz. I'm a complete ditz. But I created the system around myself. Fortunately, I stumbled upon it that was able to deal with, my ditziness and control it from that standpoint.
Yeah, which the good news is there are lots of pieces of software and apps and a variety of things now that that help folks sort of stay on task, or remember things that they know they're going to easily forget as soon as they walk away from that particular situation. Um, I think I might know the answer to this, but I mean, your your educational brain, your work brain, it seems to be going all the time, even though you have did you officially retire? Are those the words that one would use, or did you just decide you're not working there anymore?
I don't work at UB. I,
That's how I would describe it too, but I wasn't sure whether you're using that word retire.
yeah, I mean,
So
I usually say I'm retired, but before I got on this, I was doing some proof edits on a textbook I'm writing,
yeah.
and I
So
still
you're
have.
still, yeah, you're still actively engaged within your profession. But what do you do for relaxation, and how does that help you sort of unwind the
Yeah, I say, my brain's going a mile in a minute, and the things that work to not skiing, sailing, haven't sailed in a while, cooking.
oh,
When I cook, the brain doesn't go all over the place. Photography, give me a camera. And I remember once we were on vacation in Ireland, and it was really cold outside, but I'd walked out without a jacket, and I spent 2 hours shooting pictures. It didn't matter because I had a camera in my hand.
surprised you
And then
didn't
the
get
other
the
one is
frostbite?
travel.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that cold,
Oh.
but it was chilly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think though, what you just said though about going out with the camera is very much like some of the other things you described throughout your educational and professional career, is that when you see something you're interested in, you kind of you zoom in on that, and all the other stuff sort of goes to the fuzzy spaces in the background, and maybe comes back in when needed, or maybe doesn't come
Right.
back in at
Well,
all.
I mean, I describe that as being a geek, and and whatever it is, I geek out on, whether it's travel,
Mhm.
cooking, photography, and you want to know the best tech to use to travel, I'll tell you. You want to know how to find where the sun is going to set, I'll tell you what app I have on my phone that tells you where sunrise, sunset, where it is any time of the year, because computers are, I learned that computers are a tool to help me do the things I want to do.
Mhm. Yeah.
And in fact, when I was diagnosed with the learning disabilities was the exact same year that we were required to learn how to program a computer in 1970.
Oh,
And so
wow.
they've been a tool that I've used, since I was a kid.
Yeah. I remember my computer class in high school, and it was like, I don't know,
Well,
basic
actually, in high school,
language or whatever. I never figured that out.
see, and I learned in junior high school in Wellesley, and then when I came to high school, they had just gotten access to a time-shared computer system, and I actually taught the entire math department how to program a computer. Later on, I took a programming class from one of the teachers who learned more than I had been able to teach him.
Well, I did, you definitely, you always seem to have like a real strong set of skills, which I think has probably been to your advantage over time in a whole variety of situations. The fact that, you figure things out for yourself, you figure out what's going to work, and then you use the skills that you have to accomplish the things that you need to accomplish.
Well, I think those are things I got from my dad, because my dad taught me the word Catholic with a small t. I mean, small t. How'd I get that? There's dyslexia for it. A small c, means comprehensive. And my dad
Uh-huh.
had a comprehensive interest. There was really no topic that didn't interest him. And the other thing is, nothing would beat him. If he needed something was broken, you just had to spend more time finding out how to fix it. And so,
Hmm.
every you don't give up. And so, somewhere I
Wow.
read this paper about the difference between Japanese kids and American kids. They give them an unsolvable math problem, and American kids stop after, I'll say, like, 30 seconds, and the Japanese kids will go 5 minutes before they give up on the problem. And so, I'm in that sense, I guess I'm more Japanese.
But I think you're more a lot of things from all the different places that I know that you've traveled, and I suspect you've picked up all sorts of things from all over the place. But we are coming to the last few moments of our time together. I really appreciate you sharing how you operate in the world. I think that it's very interesting to sort of hear how you've figured out how to operate in the world in a way that is successful. I think, sometimes some folks haven't figured that out, and we should probably give kudos to your dad for teaching you to be really persistent. Because I think if you were a student right now and having some of the same experiences that you had, you probably would have thrown your hands up if he had not sort of taught you to just keep going, figure it out. You'll figure it out, or you're watching him do those things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one thing I've said when I've had students who've had accommodations because of learning disabilities or whatever it was, and I'd say, look, if you think I'm accomplished, I'm you.
Yeah.
And so if I could do it, you can do it, and you just have to figure it out. I think, you have to figure it out for yourself. It's nice if someone could coach you and lead you that way. But, there's an awful lot of people, like I just saw an interview with Paul McCartney who says, no one in the Beatles knows how to read music.
Oh,
None of them ever learned how to read music. And in
interesting.
fact, John learned to play guitar by banjo, which has less strings. And so his mom taught him chords on a banjo. And later on, somebody would show him another chord and he could add a string to it. So sometimes you have to work it out. And a lot of really accomplished people do work it out. It'd be nice if somebody could help you.
Well, and as a special educator, I think that one of the responsibilities that my colleagues have is to help you figure it out. Like, not to figure it out for you, but to help that individual find the way that works for them, which is why, it's all referred to as individualized educational programming.
Yep.
But it's oftentimes not as individualized as it needs to be. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. I appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing about your adventures in the future. I know that some of us travel vicariously through your photographs. So I appreciate this. But I appreciate your ability to take a good picture and to share pictures of food that sometimes I'm not sure I would eat, but other times I'm very interested in. But that's a whole nother podcast. Your daring choices about foods that people have offered you. So, but all right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for listening to us today. And we will be back in a couple of weeks. Thank you for listening to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. Join me, Dr. Lori, on Transformation Talk Radio every second and fourth Monday at 11:30 Pacific Time as we continue to explore navigating a world not designed for diversity. For advocacy and support for individuals with disabilities, let's connect. Learn more about consulting and life coaching at notoholisticconsulting.com.